For as long as there have been stories to tell, there have been people who have embellished said stories. In modern cinema, it's no different. From the well-muscled, oily strongmen to the very impractical armor of females to the more egregious one, I feel, of the extreme slow-motion yelling after a kill when there's really no reason to do that aside from it's a cool slow-motion shot. All of those, I don't think there's a lot that's testable for me, aside from one that someone brought to my attention, which is the send-off of a great hero across the sea or an ocean or a river with a flaming arrow. That's been done quite a few times. The first one I think was 1956 with Kirk Douglas and the Viking movie where they did that. But I want to pick a few of those apart, talk about some of those, and also try my hand at that long distance send-off. Some of my favorite notable examples was the Vikings in season 1. They did that in Game of Thrones with Edmure Tully. That scene was just epic in so many ways. When Blackfish came up and take the shot, you can see he checked the wind, looked at everything before he loosed it. And then of course he didn't turn around once he did loose it, because you know, real men never look backwards at explosions.
Cool guys don't look at explosions.
I think the Hall of Fame one for me is from the show Norsemen. If you haven't done it yet, do yourself a favor and check out the show Norsemen on Netflix. It is hilarious, but there's a scene in there where the new Jarl is sending off his brother, and apparently the actor also refused archery lessons because he wanted to make it look as bad as possible.
Oh, come on.
And he just fails dramatically.
Just one more arrow. No, 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 no.
Video, I'm gonna see where I rank up in between those, between Blackfish, name, but the Jarl in Norsemen.
So, no. Who dares to brew their own chieftain?
So also, if I've learned anything on my short time in YouTube, it's that people tend to have short attention spans. That or I'm just extremely boring. Most of you don't make it past the 4-minute and 30-second mark, according to my statistics. But I want to start this off with the fun. I'm going to go ahead and set up the distance shots first. So I'm going to do that. Then I also want to break down a little bit of the history of the idea of open air cremation and being on a pyre versus the longship, and how that wasn't necessarily historically accurate to the best of our knowledge based on their culture and written accounts. And lastly, if you're still around after all of that, I am going to reward you with my own attempt at making fire arrows and seeing how that works. Not necessarily lobbing shots with them, because I don't want to set my backfield on fire. I think my wife would murder me and then you'd hear about it in the news or something. But we're going to try that at the end of the video, so stick around. If not, you'll miss it. I don't care, do what you want. So let's set the scene. You're Jarl, who's a bit of a showboat and not entirely too intelligent. Decides he's going to do a large victory primal scream after he defeats someone. And then, as such, is basically promptly thrust through the back with a spear. His second in command, the new Jarl, says, well, he died like he lived, kind of like an idiot. Then he looks around and he spots you. He says, you there, archer who never wears a shirt for some reason. And you say, me? He says, yes, of course you. And you say, well, I do wear a shirt sometimes, but it's kind of hot today. And then he says, BS, you just want to show off your muscles on the internet. And then you say, of course, what's the internet? And then he says, never mind, just forget it. This got way too meta for me. Just get your stupid bow and some fire and let's light this thing off. All right, so here's our small ship. This is about the size of the one in Game of Thrones, I would say. And this is going to be my reference point. The shield is going to be on his chest here, but the second reason I wanted to bring this out here is a lot of people are under the assumption that I'm super short. Not that I care, but I just want to show you this shield is actually oversized as far as shields go. This one here, this is about 37, 38 inches. I'm 5'11", so the shield itself is just really large. This would be a shield that would be used well in like a shield wall, because you'd be able to lock it in, but it's not going to be good for like dueling or anything. This would just take a lot of damage, as you've seen on this channel, over and over. but you wouldn't be able to fight with it well just like in like a capacity one-on-one. Here lies our dearly departed leader. I have a measuring stick. I'm going to walk it out, probably try to get about 100 yards or so, because it seems like that shot was probably in the 100 to 150 range. I'm going to go into my yard a little bit. So you'll see a new part of the house. And then I'm going to take probably 6 or 7 shots. I'll change angles, try to make it look cinematic, and see if I could pull this off and not make myself look like Edmure Tully.
So, no. Who dares to brew their own chieftain?
So if you can see that, that's 362 feet. So we basically have about 120 yards to work with. You're really not going to be able to see much of the target. So I'm going to take a couple shots from the back and then side, and then bring the camera over there to give an idea of what my accuracy is looking like from this distance. That's really far. So I don't know if you can see it. You can probably see the hay bales right over there. So that's 120 yards. I'm going to start this one with a 130-pound bow just because it's a little easier for me to aim with. See how that goes in there. And probably take about 5 or 6 shots and see how I do. Okay, so here's what we got. The best shot was this one here. It was a bit of a bigger ship. I think I would have got it. And then I had a couple go a little bit deeper here, which was really close. And then these ones went a bit further back. So I think the blackfish would have to take the bow away from me and embarrass me in front of all my friends.
I'm really, really disappointed. Try firing an arrow with really cold fingers yourself before you start booing.
Okay, now we're gonna do it from this angle. Now this one right here definitely counted. I don't care what you said. That went through, hit the wood, and that's going to be it. So that's my salvation right there. I did the deed. I did the task. I sent him off. The Valkyrie shall take him home to Valhalla now. But the big thing is, was this actually done out on the river or out in the sea? What we know about the burial rites of the Norse or the Rus people come from the Muslim historian Ibn Fadlan. And he traveled with them. And if you guys have ever read Eaters of the Dead by Michael Crichton or saw the 13th Warrior, that's what it was loosely based off of. 13th Warrior, just a side note, was a great film. It kind of came around a lot before the Viking craze. And so it's just, it holds up well. I think it's really good. Anyways, going on, he wrote and described what it was like. And one thing that it didn't include was setting a longboat out to sea and then shooting it with an arrow. All things considered, his disposition on the people who would later be called Vikings was not necessarily sunny, shall we say. He described them as the filthiest of all his creatures, but he did say they were huge, tall in stature, mighty warriors, well-muscled, so he had some nice things to say. But about the burial rites, so when someone of importance died, they were placed in what they call a roofed grave for like 10 days. But it was not the final resting place. It's just a temporary one while everything and all the proper preparations were made. During his time, his garments were made ready. A small boat was constructed. His possessions, or like the grave hoard, was being gathered and divided into 3 parts. One of his household, one of the funeral garb, and one for alcohol to be drunk on his burning. It takes a bit of a darker turn where the enslaved women and everything were kind of forced into capitulation, let's say, where they'd say, I do this in love of my master. It doesn't seem like it was really agreed upon by all parties, but that was part of it. Everything was ready. They exhumed the body and dressed him in fine, fresh clothes, from his boots up to a gold button kaftan and silk hat fringed with sable. It was carried onto the boat and propped up into the yurt that had been installed there, and he rested on a quilt and propped up against cushions. He was made comfortable, he says. Fruits and herbs and alcohol were placed next to him, meat, bread, and onions. Before him, weapons around him. A dog was cut in half and tossed aboard. 2 horses ran soaked with sweat and then cut to pieces and thrown on. 2 cows followed them, and then 2 chickens. While this was being done, the other part was being done with the slave girl, who in this case was to be sacrificed. Now, it wasn't necessarily thought of across the board that a servant was sacrificed with everyone, but there's a probability that it might have had a high percentage amount. The woman had finished her task. After she was brought out, the men would begin to bang their shield with sticks, and she was brought onto the boat, and then she was sacrificed to be with him by the Lady of Death. Now, this is one thing the Viking show did a pretty good job of showing, was that final resting with the Lady of Death, so to speak, where she did the sacrifice. That's something that was written about by Fadlan, so there is some basis for that. They did a decent job in there. And then after that, one of the family members would run up naked with a torch and catch the boat on fire. But the important thing to note is it would never put out to sea. It was set up on shore, and if you do anything with the boat, you'll find that the fire tends to stop at the water line. So if you're trying to burn someone or bury someone and outdoor cremate them, doing it on a boat isn't that great, because it's not necessarily going to get hot enough to do the whole person, so to say. I think flaming arrows have a really cool factor. You think of Gladiator, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, even Timeline had a great scene with fire arrows, but they weren't practical outside of using them for sieges or try to catch thatched roofs on fire. So this is my own improvised one. Basically, I just took some linen here. I affix it to this. I have some alcohol and a lighter, and I have a hose right here, which is why I'm really close to the my shed. So I'm going to try this out, see how it works, and see if that stays in place, and just kind of the results.
So it wasn't until editing at this point I realized my mic had stopped working. But what I was saying was that when I was doing this test with the rubbing alcohol and stuff, that has a high flash point, but it doesn't burn for long. If you have pitch or a tar or some type of slow burning fuel, it'll be much better for fire arrows, because when you release the arrow, what happens is the speed of it coming off the bow tends to just extinguish the flame right away. So I didn't want something that was a long burning one just because it's my first time messing with it. But if you guys want to see more research about fire arrows and see me try a few more things, I'm happy to oblige.